Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the oldest, most traded and most economically complex commodities on earth, wheat. And I don't just mean the farming side of it. We're going to cover everything. The number behind the global wheat market, the countries producing and consuming it at scale. It's almost hard to believe, and the economic forces that make its price fluctuate overnight. And the very real environmental costs hiding behind every loaf of bread on your shelf. This is the full picture, so let's get into it. February 2022, a bakery owner in Nairobi opens her flour invoice. It's double what it was 10 days ago. Nothing in Kenya has changed, no drought, no crop failure, no supplier problem. Her world was exactly as she had left it. What had changed is Russia had invaded Ukraine. That's it. The whole explanation. Two countries, 5,000 kilometers away, countries most of her customers have never thought about, supplied roughly a quarter of the world's exported wheat. When the Black Sea shipping lanes shut down, traders in Chicago repriced the global supply within hours. She found out last. This is what people mean when they say wheat is a geopolitical commodity. It doesn't just feed people, it transfers risk, invisibly, instantly, and almost always in the same direction, away from the traders towards the bakery owner. That's what this video is about. And by the end of it, you won't be surprised this happens. You'll be surprised it doesn't happen more often. Once again, we find ourselves meeting with supply and demand. Wheat is what economists call an inelastic commodity. When its price goes up, people don't dramatically stop buying it because they can't. Bread is a staple, noodles are a staple. The foods made from wheat are so embedded in daily life across cultures that demand holds firm even when prices spike. A sandwich chain in London grumbles about margins. Customers still buy lunch. A family in Cairo still buys flour. That inelasticity is part of what makes wheat so commercially powerful. It's also part of what makes it so politically dangerous. When even the most basic food becomes unaffordable, people don't quietly switch to something else. They get angry. And 2022, that shows us exactly what that looks like in real time. Russia and Ukraine together account for roughly a quarter of global wheat exports. When the conflict disrupted the Black Sea shipments, the futures spiked almost overnight. A pension fund in Frankfurt saw a small windfall from its commodity holdings. Fatima in Nairobi watched her input costs double in a week. Same event, completely opposite experiences. So who's growing all this wheat and who's eating it? The largest producer on earth is China at over 140 million metric tons in the 2025-26 season. India and Russia follow closely. Together, those three countries produce roughly 41% of all the wheat grown on the planet. But here's the part that surprises people. Despite being the world's largest producer, China is also the largest consumer, around 103 million tons per year. Its domestic demand is so enormous that even growing at 140 million tons isn't always enough. China produces staggering quantities and it still needs to import more. India sits second for consumption at just over 90 million tons annually, driven by its population and the central role wheat plays in Indian cuisine. Now, shift from production to exports and the rankings change completely. Russia leads global wheat exports with about 16% of the world market. Australia sits right alongside it at a nearly equal 16%. Then Canada, the United States, and France. Those 5 countries together account for more than 63% of all wheat exports worldwide. The biggest producers aren't the biggest exporters. That gap between who grows the most and who feeds everyone else is where most geopolitical risk lives. A drought in Australia, a conflict in Russia, a policy shift in Canada, Any one of those ripples straight through the bread shelves in Africa and the Middle East. That trade doesn't happen by accident. It runs on two economic foundations most people never think about. The first is comparative advantage. Australia has vast arable land, a dry climate perfect for wheat, and low production costs. Japan has minimal farmland, but extraordinarily high manufacturing capability. So, Japan imports wheat, Australian wheat, and exports precision technology. Both nations benefit. The wheat flows, the trade flows, the economy grows. The second foundation is futures markets, and this is where it gets interesting. A farmer in Kansas plants his crop in autumn. He won't harvest until summer. He has no idea what the price will be by then. So, he sells what's called a futures contract. Logging in today's price for wheat, he'll deliver in 6 months. That protects him from a price collapse. On the other side, the trade might be a grain company, a food manufacturer, or a speculative investor. They are all betting on where prices will go. These markets, they serve several real purposes. They enable price discovery and let producers manage risk, but they also introduce volatility. When conflict erupts, when weather forecasts look bad, when a rumor spreads, traders react instantly. Prices can swing wildly before a single grain has even been harvested or shipped. For wealthy nations, this is a manageable inconvenience. For developing countries that import wheat and hold minimal resources, a price spike can become a food crisis within just a few weeks. This is where wheat stops being an economic story and becomes a political one. Egypt is one of the world's largest wheat importers. For decades, the Egyptian government has subsidized bread, treating it almost like a public utility. In 2008, when the global wheat prices spiked, following droughts in both Australia and Kazakhstan, Egyptian bread subsidies cost the government billions more than they had budgeted. When reformers proposed scaling them back, protests erupted within days. The proposal was naturally reversed. Because in Egypt, as in dozens of countries, cheap bread, it isn't food policy, it's social stability. Governments that get this wrong don't just face criticism, they face an uprising. This is public goods theory in practice. Some commodities become so essential to social order that governments decide that markets alone cannot deliver them safely. Then, there's also the corporate side. Consider vertical integration, the process by which large businesses acquire every link in the supply chain. Seed companies, fertilizers, suppliers, grain storage, flour mills, retail brands, all under one roof. A handful of global giants now control enormous proportions of the wheat pipeline from the field to the supermarket. This can create efficiencies and lower consumer prices, but it also concentrates market power in very few hands, squeezing independent farmers and small millers out of the system entirely. Economies of scale mean a massive industrial mill processing 10 million tons annually can produce flour at a fraction of what a small regional mill can. The small operator, they simply can't compete. The food system becomes more centralized, cheaper in one sense, much more fragile in another. Now, the part of the wheat story that doesn't make it onto the label, the environmental cost. Start with the water. A significant proportion of global wheat is irrigated, drawing from rivers, lakes, and underground aquifers in many regions that are already under severe water strain. In parts of northern India and the US Great Plains, the water being used to grow wheat is being drawn down faster than it can be replenished. These are non-renewable withdrawals. Once those aquifers are gone, the farming systems built around them are also gone. Then there's the soil. Intensive monocultures growing the same crop on the same land year after year depletes soil carbon, increases erosion, and gradually hollows out the biological richness of the earth itself. Healthy soil is one of the most valuable and most overlooked resources on the planet. Industrial wheat farming is spending it fast. The fertilizer problem compounds this. Nitrogen fertilizers are critical for modern wheat yields, but producing them accounts for around 1.4% of global CO2 emissions. Once applied, excess nitrogen and phosphorus runoff into waterways, triggering emulsification, algae blooms, they explode, oxygen depletes, aquatic ecosystems collapse. Nitrogen and phosphorus pollution from farming is responsible for 78% of global marine and freshwater emulsification. And that's where the loop starts. Wheat farming contributes to climate change through emissions, land use, chemical runoff. Climate change, in turn, threaten wheat yields through droughts, heat waves, and shifting rainfall. Each makes the other worse. Scientists warn that without a fundamental shift in agricultural practices, this feedback loop makes it increasingly difficult to hit the Paris target agreements. The crop that sustains human civilization under current industrial practices, quietly undermining the conditions that make civilization possible. That's not an argument to stop growing wheat. It's an argument that we need to look at growing it differently if we are to sustain our current population. 2 centuries ago, the economist Thomas Malthus made a prediction. Population growth, he argued, would eventually outpace food supply. Famine was not a risk, it was a mathematical certainty. He was wrong. We outran his prediction through technology, trade, and the extraordinary productivity of modern agriculture. Wheat was central to that story. The Green Revolution in the 1960s, which deployed high-yield wheat varieties across South Asia and Latin America, is estimated to have saved over 1 billion lives. But the system we built to win that race is showing strain. The same industrial model that defeated Malthus is now straining the water, the soil, and climate systems that made it possible. And the geopolitical agriculture that moves wheat around the world is increasingly fragile. A handful of export corridors, a small number of corporate intermediaries, and a futures market that can price a Nairobi bakery out of business based on decisions made in Moscow. Fatima is still open. A lot of bakers in her position aren't. The next time you pick up a loaf of bread, sit with that for a moment. Not with guilt, but with genuine curiosity, because understanding how our food is grown, priced, traded, and subsidized. That's not just intellectually interesting, it's one of the most consequential things you can understand about how the world actually works. If this gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find the channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. I want to know, did anything in this video surprise you? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.